the enigma here is the US, and unfortunately, they get away with it because literally every state has its own set of rules. So there's certain states where you could literally, I mean, as a chiropractor, you could do an adjustment and pull out a scalpel and do surgery at the same time. It's as bizarre as that.
This is the one. Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the third episode of Ballers Brew. That is correct. You heard me. Ballers Brew, the world's hottest, most insightful and relevant sports podcast that brings you diverse perspectives on various trending topics within the global sporting industry through thought-provoking discussions. Now, you may be wondering, Ballers Brew? I know, right? It is quite a tongue twister, but trust me when I tell you, this is a community that you want to be a part of. My name is Michael Bromfield, and I am the host and creator of Ballers Brew. For those that are tuning in, I'm super stoked to have you listening. Whether you are a passionate fan, a professional athlete, or a sports enthusiast, this is the place to be. Now, let's jump into today's episode and introduce our exceptional guest. All over social media, numerous videos have gained popularity, showcasing enlightening and satisfying adjustments received by athletes and individuals worldwide. Some of you listening may be unfamiliar with these practices, whilst others are likely to be well acquainted with the infamous Y-strap technique. Joining us is Simon Lawson, a true visionary in the field of sports medicine. Simon currently holds the esteemed position as chair of the Fédération Internationale de Chiropractic du Sport, which translates to the International Federation of Sports Chiropractic. This is a role that he has passionately embraced since 2015. In addition to his international leadership, Simon has made remarkable contributions to the Chiropractic Association of South Africa, where he served as a president for 2 terms from 2011 to 2014 and 2015 to 2017. As a founding member and former president of Chiro Sport South Africa, Simon has played a pivotal role in advancing the field of chiropractic sports medicine. With an extensive educational background, Simon has earned his Master of Science in Sports and Exercise Medicine, his Master of Technology in Chiropractic, and he has acquired his ICCSP, which accredits him as an international certified chiropractic sports physician, solidifying his expertise in the intersection of chiropractic care and sports performance. Simon's impact extends far beyond his professional affiliations. He has worked closely with prominent sporting associations such as the British Masters Athletics Federation, the Derby County Cricket Club, English Cricket Abroad, the Highveld Lions cricket team, the Lions rugby team, Nottingham University's hockey club, South African rowing, UK athletics, and the notorious Wanderers Sports Medicine Centre, leaving an indelible mark on the world of sports. From wherever you are listening, please give Simon a big, warm welcome and prepare for an engaging and enlightening conversation as he shares his wealth of insights, experiences, and expertise in the realm of chiropractic sports medicine. So without further ado, let's dive into this captivating episode of Ballers Brew with our esteemed guest, Simon Lawson.
Well, thank you, Michael. It was quite an introduction. I'll try and live up to at least a little bit of that. Yeah, it's been a great journey and privilege to have been in a profession that's afforded me to get there.
I always love especially when I was with my mom at Congress and I get to hear all the stories of, what's gone on in the build-up, in the development of CASA, and as you say, to where what you've been able to accomplish within your career thus far, and all the fun and insightful stories of behind the scenes at international congresses and also local congresses. So thank you so much for availing yourself to join us on the podcast this evening. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, I'm very excited to have you on, and I can't wait to unpack this conversation and to see where it goes, and also just to get a further insight into the relevancy of why the chiropractic profession is so pertinent to the sporting industry?
Thanks, Mike. And thank you for having me on. And thank you to the listeners for joining in. Got a couple of interesting things to discuss this evening. But yeah, I just think from a sports relation to chiropractic, chiropractic in its simplest form can be very, very mechanical and quite straightforward with regards to getting joints to move properly, getting muscles and joints to talk to each other. So, I mean, from the simplest form and perspective on chiropractic, it just lends itself to sports chiropractic. Sportsmen and women put themselves through huge amounts of loads and stress. And just as you would your car, you need to get serviced every now and again. And particularly when you're putting your body under those kind of stresses and strains, you need to be servicing it a lot more than the average person. So on a very basic level, just dealing with the mechanics, alignment, and the biomechanics of the human body just lends itself so nicely to sports chiropractic. The minute you start delving a little bit deeper into chiropractic and its very firm philosophical associations with the nervous system, and the understanding that the basic premise of chiropractic is that if you've got a fully functional nervous system, you've got a fully functional body. You should never get sick. You should never get injured. Ideally, that is a utopic world. We'd all love to live there, but that is the chiropractic philosophy. And obviously, we apply that, particularly from a sports chiropractic perspective. We apply that with our athletes. And just like a Formula One motor car, if everything's working properly and finely tuned, you can achieve your optimal performance. The nice thing about sports chiropractic and often the challenge, both to get the message across to the athlete and the patient, but also to achieve the results as a practitioner, is you're not necessarily looking for pain. And you're not necessarily looking to treat an injury. In fact, most of the time you're looking to try and avoid an injury. So if you can look after your athletes and stay ahead of the curve, in principle, they should be able to achieve their optimal performances and with a bit of luck, never get injured.
You actually covered a few of the points that I was going to ask within my first question already. But it's so true what you say, where you refer to the body, the individual or the athlete as this F1 car, so to speak. And I mean, if you look at F1, when the cars come into pits, there's so many things that they're looking for on that car to make sure that if there are any faults, what needs to be replaced, what needs to be fixed. And with the human body, we need to make sure that we're in optimal form in order to perform when you go out there on game day, whether it may be on the athletics track, on the rugby field, or wherever that may be. Perhaps for those that are listening and that are wondering, right, we've started this conversation and we've quickly gone into depth of what a chiropractic is, but maybe to simplify it a little bit more for someone who's still sitting at home going, what on earth is a chiropractor? What am I listening to? How would you describe the chiropractic profession in a very simplified form?
Simplified. So in essence, we're sort of defined as neuromuscular skeletal specialists, which probably isn't that simplified. But if you break it down, neuro pertains to the nervous system, muscular being the muscular system, and skeletal being your bony structure. And the basic understanding is that none of those three can operate independently. So when you're looking at a patient, or let's be a little bit more specific to my field of specialization and interest, let's look at an athlete. If you're just dealing with the neurological component, or just the muscular component, or just the skeletal component, or maybe two of those three, the likelihood of getting that athlete back to optimal performance is probably not great. They might be able to achieve back to play, but they may not be able to achieve the optimal performance. So chiropractic really is focused on the ability to identify potentially where there's a breakdown in that neuromuscular skeletal system, whether there's any inhibition that can cause a breakdown in the function. And by identifying where that is and hopefully correcting it, we can get that athlete or that patient back to health, back to top performance. So the way we do that as a chiropractor is primarily through manipulation. Traditionally, chiropractic is associated with the spine. Obviously, the spinal column houses the spinal cord, which is your sort of super highway of neurological information coming from your brain to every tissue in your body. One of the sort of primary and probably most affected positions or places that the nervous system can be inhibited is as those nerves exit the spine. So obviously from a chiropractor's perspective and viewpoint, if we were to go directly to the spine and see how the joints are moving, see what the health of the joint and the disc between the two vertebral bodies is doing, and ascertaining whether there is any kind of breakdown, dysfunction, or inhibition coming from that, we can identify that through our training and through our skill set. And we've got a number of tools within the manipulative therapy field that will help us address those issues. It can often be slightly controversial in certain mainstream sectors, and I think that's largely due to a poor understanding or a lack of knowledge and probably a lack of communication on both sides of that scale. One, from the chiropractors not really explaining to their peers and colleagues exactly what we do, and also from our peers and colleagues not either wanting to know or not really being bothered to understand what we do. And that miscommunication, I think, has led to a lot of misconceptions and a lot of myths out there about chiropractic, which fortunately, over the last as little as sort of 15, 20, maybe 30 years, has changed gastronomically. I mean, I can remember when I was graduating, I grew up going fortunately, to a very privileged private school, growing up with a lot of guys who ended up studying medicine, and very much mainstream professional careers. And then along came this little guy who went to study chiropractic at a technical college down the road. I mean, it was almost unheard of. So I was very particular and very careful about who I told I was a chiropractor to, because at that stage there was a lot of stigma attached to being a chiropractor and doing chiropractic. I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, the change that has happened in the last 20 years is mind-blowing. We now get regular referrals from GPs, neurospecialists, ortho specialists. I'm not always convinced there's an understanding from them what we do, but what they've learned and what they've understood from feedback from patients and what they've seen is that chiropractic does make a difference. So in the face of being faced with whether they need to give you another dose of cortisone or painkillers or anti-inflammatories, or giving the chiropractor a go, I think slowly but surely they've warmed to the idea that maybe we give the chiropractor a go, let's see how they go. And slowly starting to see that we do get results, that patients are satisfied. And without having to undergo surgery or extensive loading up of medication, the chiropractors actually have a role when it comes to musculoskeletal medicine in particular. So there's been some big changes in our career, in our profession, should I say. We are still a very relatively young profession. We're about 120 odd years old. So in the greater scheme of things, chiropractic really is a young profession. But as I say, there have been some interesting myths, some interesting misconceptions about chiropractic. But the good news is that we're slowly coming through there. There's a lot of competition in that musculoskeletal medicine space. A lot of other professions that do manual therapy. I honestly believe there's more than enough patients and athletes out there for all of us to be more than busy. And we all have our areas of expertise and specialization. And understanding where that area of expertise and specialization is, and the application of your area of interest and specialization for the benefit of the athlete and the patient is really what matters and what counts. I'm really fortunate in that in my sort of 25 years of practicing, I've managed to develop a network of people, professionals who I interact with and work very well with on a daily basis. And a lot of those are physiotherapists, biokineticists, and massage therapists, lots of people who do manual therapy. And the beauty of it is we all kind of know where our little space is and what our little area of expertise is. So I regularly have probably 20 or 30 physiotherapists who refer patients to me. They refer a patient through to me. It's for a specific reason. They get their adjustment or their manipulation, and they go straight back to the physio. And that's the way it should be. That's the way it should work. You know, as a patient comes to you, you become the gatekeeper of their health and their ailment or whatever they presented to you with. And it's your responsibility to look after that patient. There's also your responsibility to make sure that patient gets the best care necessary. And if that means you need to refer them from a chiropractic perspective, you need to refer them to a physiotherapist, a biokineticist, or an orthopod or a neurosurgeon, you make the best call for that patient. And that's what makes you a better practitioner.
I think it's so cool. There's so much to unpack from what you've now mentioned, and I've been in a fortunate position to be in a household with a chiropractor who has been able to provide some insight into what the profession entails, and to be fortunate enough to receive certain treatment for different ailments that I may have within my own athletic career, and to also be guided and to further understand, as you rightfully mentioned, within chiropractic and within the medical field, you learn different practices that are pertinent to specifically the techniques that you're using. And whenever my mom, who's a chiropractor, is always referring to what she's doing, I always try and bring it back to something which I know. And I think it's also what you mentioned earlier. It's obviously going back to biomechanics and anatomy and understanding how that plays a vital role in conjunction with the nervous system to acquire optimal performance. And it's also funny, a lot of the time you hear the common debate of chiropractor or physiotherapist. Where do you go? What do you do? Who is more qualified or specialized for what you may deem necessary to get yourself in a better position to perform optimally? And it's like you said, you actually function as a puzzle. All the different parts need to form together in order to ensure that the human body is working as best as it can. And maybe to segue, I thought it was quite interesting. You mentioned your time within high school and then how that transitioned into a Technicon. But a part of that journey also entails where you thereafter positioned yourself within the chiropractic realm in South Africa and abroad. And within my introduction, I mentioned that you are deeply involved within various organizations, both nationally and internationally, plus several professional and interprofessional commissions and various executive committees. Can you comment on the pivotal role that you have played within these numerous bodies?
Now you're asking. Obviously, there's going to be a strong bias on my perspective on my role that was played. But before we go any further, your mom is an amazing chiropractor for starters, and you'll be incredibly fortunate to have her as your mom. That's for sure. Yeah, it was an interesting one. To be fair, I actually grew up wanting to be that physiotherapist who ran on the field every Saturday and treated all these amazing sports stars. That really was a childhood dream. Unfortunately, the flip side of that coin was that I loved my sport. So obviously, any waking hour that I wasn't forced to be sitting at a desk in a classroom, I was on the sports field, which unfortunately doesn't equate to 7As when you get to matric. So I was never going to get into physio school, that's for sure. But I was young leaving school and managed to get a sports scholarship to go and study A-levels in the UK. And I guess in a lot of ways, that's where my journey in chiropractic kind of started. I fractured my back when I was 15, mixture of playing silly buggers and bowling on the hard grounds of Joburg. And I was off sport for a year. I fully recovered, and then was playing sport in the UK during that A-level year, and blew my back up again at the beginning of the cricket season from bowling again, and literally couldn't walk. The sports master, I think, who was absolutely petrified that this little South African who was supposed to open the bowling and the batting for his first team cricket was not going to be around for the season, said to me, "Listen, I'll take you to a mate of mine who's a chiropractor." I said, "Look, I have no idea what a chiropractor is, but yeah, sign me up. If she can help me, nobody else has been able to help me." I'd been to the school doc and the nurse and the physio, and I'd been to an orthopod, had x-rays done. Everyone could see where the original problem was, but they couldn't fix me. So he booked an appointment. I remember actually speaking to my parents the night before saying I was going to chiropractor, and my dad actually lost it completely. I think if he wasn't an 11-hour flight away, there's not a chance I would have made it to the chiropractor the next morning. But the sports master picked me up off the dormitory floor and put me in his car and took me to the chiropractic clinic. The chiropractor was actually waiting for me. From what I can remember, it was a lovely lady called Katie Pears. I've spent most of my career trying to find out who she is and where she is, because I mean she's the person you can blame for all of this. So she was waiting patiently at the door. She said to the sports master, "Bring him straight through." Put me on the table, put up the x-ray. She said, "Oh, no, what's wrong with you?" I'll have him bowling by the weekend. And I just started laughing. I said, yeah, okay. I've spent 10 days lying on the dormitory floor. I can't see myself bowling in 4 days' time. Anyway, she treated me 3 times that week, and I was back bowling in the nets on the Saturday. And that's when I first thought, wow, jeepers, this stuff works. The thing that makes me chuckle is I did actually go and investigate what chiropractic was. So I went to the library at school, and this is the bit that makes me laugh. So I really don't think it was that long ago, but clearly it was. I had to pull out an encyclopedia to look up chiropractic because we didn't have the internet, giving too much away. But I did actually go and look up what chiropractic was all about, and it seemed to resonate with me. But I mean, it was going nowhere, so I parked it off and carried on playing sport and loving my life overseas. And it just happened to be the year after, or the year of, the initiation of the chiropractic course at the University of Johannesburg. And they were busy looking for applicants. And my mother somehow had found out about this, and in a conversation said, would I be interested? So I said, yeah, of course I would. She said, no. I've got to run around town and try and get your application in by tomorrow. Tomorrow's the deadline. If you are interested, I don't mind doing it, but don't send me on a wild goose chase. I said, no, I even looked it up on the encyclopedia. I know what chiropractic's all about. So shame, bless her heart, she got my application in. Obviously raised a few eyebrows because this kid was now not going to be attending any interviews or aptitude tests because he was stuck in the UK, and all these tests had to be done in South Africa. But fortunately, the British Chiropractic Association was involved with the setup of the course, and they were having an academic meeting in Johannesburg to finalize what was going into the academic program. And while the BCA contingency was there, they said, would you mind interviewing this kid who's in the UK at school and see if he's a suitable candidate? So that's how the interview got set up. I had a haircut for the first time in about 10 months. Somehow I managed to polish my shoes and borrow a suit, but I had no idea what I was doing. I went for the interview, did the tests, and they seemed to think that I would be an asset to the profession, apparently. So that's how the ball started rolling. Somehow bumbled my way through chiropractic school. A couple of bumps and bruises and bends in the road, but we got there. And shortly after that, I did a couple of locum jobs as I graduated, and then I went to the UK solely to kind of study or to do their postgraduate year, which was kind of their internship. And literally, I was going there for a year, and I was going to come back to South Africa and obviously turn the world upside down. But as things happen, 1 year turned into seven and a bit years. Worked at numerous different chiropractic clinics around the UK, mainly sports-based clinics. And I guess that's where I got a lot of experience from. I was fortunate enough to be able to attend many postgraduate courses. The beauty about being in Europe is that your access to postgraduate education is phenomenal. So literally every weekend for the first 3 years I was there, I was doing a course on something, new technique, approach, whatever the story was. And I guess off the back of that, just got my teeth really stuck into chiropractic and sports chiropractic in particular, and got involved with the British Masters Athletics Federation. I guess the passion at the back end of it was that I always wanted to study sports medicine. But as a chiropractor, particularly in those days, there weren't many opportunities or many options at all. Of an institution that would take a chiropractor on to study sports medicine. And fortunately, the sports medicine course at Nottingham University, run out of Queen's Medical Centre, was one of probably 2 in the world at the time that took on allied health professionals into the sports medicine program. And with a bit of a good word from a sports medicine colleague, I somehow managed to get into that course. So that was towards the end of my time in the UK. I think it was about my 5th year or so. So I went into full-time study at the age of 30, which I can highly recommend going back to university, having a bit of knowledge behind you. It really was a phenomenal year on a number of levels. I must admit, I didn't really enjoy playing first-team university hockey with a bunch of 17-year-olds at the age of 30. That was a bit of a test. But but it was a great year, and just a bucket list thing for me. I really wanted to study sports medicine, and that for me was a big tick box. And just to experience the British education system and access to higher academia, which was just an amazing experience, which I absolutely loved. I was very much involved with the British Chiropractic Sports Council through those years, and I guess off the back of my exposure with the sports medicine course at Nottingham, they kind of integrate their students into a number of different sports teams and sports programs, elite British sports programs in and around the Midlands. And obviously Loughborough University, Birmingham University, Leeds University are all fairly close, and all have a lot of their elite training squads in those universities. So, I mean, access to British rowing, the English Cricket Board, UK athletics, UK triathlon, and then the universities themselves, the rugby teams, the hockey teams, the cricket teams. So your opportunity to engage with athletes of an elite level was phenomenal. And obviously doing the sports medicine course opened up massive doors in that regard. At some point shortly after that, I needed to make a decision whether I was going to stay in the UK, plant my roots, and make a go of what I'd created and been fortunate enough to create within the sporting world there, or come back to South Africa and give it a chance. And I guess in the back of my mind, I was always going to come back to South Africa and see what it had to offer. So I decided I'd do that and came back to South Africa, started setting up my own little practice. And I guess when you're used to being so busy and you start afresh, you've got a bit of time on your hands. So I think you start doing a few things. When you look back, you probably think, what the hell was I thinking? And one of the things I started doing was sending emails to the Secretary General of CASA, asking him what he was doing and why things weren't making any sense in the chiropractic world in South Africa and what needed to change. And he turned around and said, well, it seems like you've got a lot to say. Why don't you try and join our council? And I think that was probably one of the silly things I did to start off with. So I got roped into the Chiropractic Association of South Africa's council. I had no idea what I was getting myself in for. But yeah, you blink your eyes and a good few years go by. And next thing you serve 2 terms as president. And yeah, hopefully you made some kind of impression or impact on where the direction of chiropractic was going in this country. Fortunately, throughout that journey, I was surrounded by some incredible people with lots of support. So I think as a team within that sort of, what was it, 12 or 14 years I was on council, as a team, we achieved a hell of a lot and really teed chiropractic up in this country quite nicely. It's never a done job. There's always things that need to be improved on and tweaked and modified and progressed. But I think it certainly gave us a good platform to launch the new era of chiropractic in South Africa. And as I say, incredibly fortunate to have been part of that. You know, being president of CASA opens up all sorts of other doors, and certainly on an international level. I had fortunate exposure through the sports stuff and through FIX, the International Federation of Sports Chiropractic, that I had a lot of certainly European connections from my time working at sports chiropractic, and kind of connected those through the presidency of CASA and being involved with the World Federation of Chiropractic. So that's where kind of everything sort of melted together quite nicely. And having these connections and friendships that you developed along the way, particularly on the sporting side of things, you know, as anybody who's played sport will know, you know, if you've sat down at the end of a game where you've given each other stick for an hour and a half, or even a day's cricket, you sit down and have a beer together, you're the best mates in the world. And certainly from sports chiropractic feeding into the World Federation of Chiropractic, it was no different. So I got lots of incredibly good friends, incredibly good connections overseas. And I guess when people know you, they've seen what you've done, and they can trust you, other opportunities open up. So I've been incredibly fortunate to be involved in a lot of different things, a lot of wonderful leadership roles. And I consider myself incredibly fortunate that I've been given these opportunities at a seemingly young age. I mean, 25 years in a profession sounds pretty old, really. But to be fair, to get all of those things under your belt, it's in such a short period of time has been remarkable. It certainly hasn't felt like 25 years, and everything is sort of seamlessly rolled together. I must admit, I put it down to fate. I think I was born to be a chiropractor, and I was born to do the role and the job that I'm doing. And as I say, I'm excessively grateful and very humbled and chuffed to be where I am.
Now a word from our sponsor. Playbook Athletes is a media and marketing company that provides strategic and innovative brand exposure across both athletic and professional markets. Their goal is to focus their exposure and craft their apparel with personality and feeling to ensure that they capture and display the real you. Your individuality, your struggles, your grind brought to life through cotton and ink, to be displayed on the national stage. Everyone has a why, and Playbook Athlete wants to hear about it. So, what are you waiting for? To join the movement, go to playbook.store and purchase yourself some amazing products. That is playbook.store. More excitingly, as a listener of the Ballers Brew podcast, you get 15% off when you use promo code Michael15. That is capital MICHAEL 15. Hashtag why I grind. Now back to the program. Takeaway points. It was very insightful and interesting to be able to hear the unique journey that you went on to find the position that you're in today. And as you say, there's so many little parts, and at times you're wondering, why did I get myself involved in this, or why did I wish to step into this specific committee? And something that resonated with me, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm the type of person, when you see something and you believe that you can make change or create an environment that's more impactful or more efficient, or you can bring about something for the greater community that will be beneficial for the overall team or that area, and then that's something that you do. And when you step in, you're going to give it 110%. And that really, really resonated with me. And it was cool to see that how sometimes you don't intentionally, or as an individual, you don't intentionally try to make something of a situation. That situation lends itself to the environment, or it may fall into place. And as you say, right time, right place, and how you got to be within those. For instance, when in the UK, you're able to network, and you then have the opportunity to study in the UK and be abroad, and then further later, a few years later, join back into those committees. And something that I thought was cool, you touched on the Secretary General and how they play an important role within the CASA committee. And something I thought maybe be important to touch on, because, in society today, social media is a strong tool for marketing purposes. And after various conversations with the current Chiropractic Association of South Africa's Secretary General, I was informed that this platform can be misused by practitioners when conveying information to the public. Can you perhaps comment on this statement and share whether this is a similar sentiment with that of both Fix and SASMA?
So it's an interesting one, and I think the confusion, and let's call it the conflict, comes around because it traditionally, well, not even traditionally, factually and legally, as a profession, you're actually not allowed to advertise. Obviously, the scope and the landscape of what you can put onto social media, what's okay, what's not okay, is changing at such a rapid rate that legally nobody's prepared to put that stuff down in black and white. So there's a constant push, people trying to see what they can get away with on social media, and those that are, I guess, in some way trying to toe the line, but in the same regard, trying to make a living, trying to build a business, trying to build a brand and a label. And I think that's where the conflict comes in. You've probably got a generation of chiropractors, and this is not unique to chiropractic by any stretch of imagination, but the people who are probably in leadership roles across the professions came from an era where it was quite common practice you did not advertise, and that was just the way it is. And now you're faced with a younger generation coming through who, as far as they're concerned, have qualified or graduated as a chiropractor or whatever professional, and now need to build a business. So how do you learn? Because you're not taught this at any health faculty. Sadly, it's probably one of the biggest downfalls of studying a health qualification. Is you're not taught how to run a business, and at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. If you can't run a successful business, it doesn't matter how good your skills are; they're going to be wasted. So these youngsters are coming out and trying to build a business, going to people who build businesses and can teach you how to build a business, but it's all based on commercial models, which are not professional models. So this is where you start to get the conflict. So on a commercial model, absolutely get your name out there, be visible, buy adverts on your social media platforms so that you can sit at the top of the list so people see you first. All those kind of things are common commercial business practices, but they don't fly in a professional scenario. So that's where a lot of the conflict comes in. Where CASA has been amazing over the last couple of years is they've invested a lot of money and a lot of time in their social media campaigns. And essentially, CASA is there to protect and promote our profession. And it really is, the onus really does fall on them to make sure that the public know who we are and what we do. Unfortunately, there are practitioners out there who see this as an easy opportunity to take the material that CASA's spend a lot of time and money on to get out there to the public and morph it to make it look like it's their own. So that's one of the avenues that I think you might be alluding to. And then there's constantly this issue of trying to promote your own business and your own brand and label above anything and anyone else. Now, categorically, that is illegal, according to the professional board. You're more than welcome to advertise your practice. You're more than welcome to tell people that you're out there, but you can't purport to be better than the next chiropractor or the next other professional that's out there. Those are the simplest rules out there. There are obviously more complicated ones. If we all towed the line, everybody would be happy. But everybody's got to push a little bit every now and again. See where the boundary ropes are.
I've always posed the question as to, earlier alluded to the prominent issue of misconceptions formulated around that of the chiropractic profession. And I always point out in the discussions I would have with the SG is there not a means through this promotional material in a way in which light can be shed on the profession to try and take away or remove those walls of what those misconceptions may be? And as you rightfully mentioned, CASA have spent and invested a lot of money into trying to create their own media, or through their own media platforms, put content out which is informative, which is insightful, and it's relevant as to what does the profession entail. But then what always catches my eye is that, for instance, when you look abroad, especially perhaps in the US, because that's mainly where I see content coming in, is that the rules within South Africa aren't necessarily regulated within other countries. So, for instance, the way in which they may market their profession will be very different to what we may see locally. And that's, for instance, when you start to see videos of different techniques being practiced on clients, and then these techniques are used at home, and then that's when further issues and implications start to take place.
Look, I think our legislation is largely protective on both sides, both for the profession and the public. And I wouldn't say we're overly draconian by any stretch of the imagination. I think we're fairly well aligned with the majority of countries in the world on a chiropractic basis. The enigma here is the US. And unfortunately, they get away with it because literally every state has its own set of rules. So there's certain states where you could literally, as a chiropractor, you could do an adjustment and pull out a scalpel and do surgery at the same time. It's as bizarre as that. To be fair, it's a bit of a bittersweet scenario, and I guess a double-edged sword in that in some ways, the old adage, there's no such thing as bad advertising, sort of comes through. And that, with these videos that come through from the US, where guys put microphones in places you probably don't want to know about, they get 25 clicks out of a patient, and the person gets up and goes, "Oh, wow, man, that was amazing." As far-fetched as that is, it's got our profession a lot of airtime, and like every second patient that walks in now goes, "Oh, I've seen the videos." I'm like, "Oh gosh, no, you haven't." It puts untold pressure on us, because a lot of patients come in and they just want to hear the click, and it doesn't quite work like that. But as I say, it is bittersweet, and there's a double-edged sword. And as much as you're getting the profession out there, people now talk freely about chiropractic, the pros and cons. But at least the conversation opens up, whereas we never used to have a conversation. So in that regard, it's been really powerful and positive. But as I say, a lot of those videos put us under a lot of undue pressure. You actually mentioned earlier on about the Y strap, which that's one of the videos that's really
that's what I wanted to touch on. And
I must admit, we managed to get a hold of the supplier and brought in a few. And there were a few of us who tried it out for a while. I use it more as a traction tool. It's an amazing traction tool. It works incredibly well. But you've got to be so careful how you use that. Those videos that they show from the States where they literally yank the guy and he gravitates 3 feet off the bed and lands and
Yeah.
goes, wow, that's the most amazing. Like, yeah, yeah, you might get one or two patients you could get. I don't know how you work out which of those patients would respond well to that. And maybe there's a sort of an exit door where there's a lot of body bags. I don't know, but you've got to be incredibly careful with that. And there's no doubt in skilled hands that's an incredibly powerful tool, but that's not to play around with. Hey?
No, I always wanted, and that was actually what I wanted to touch on now is, as I so called it, the infamous Y strap. And that is the video that made its rounds, and especially dating back to 2020, 2021, where, short clip media was the go-to, and obviously satisfying content. A lot of people were like, oh, wow, what is this? And I remember going to my mom going like, well, what is this Y strap? Do you have one of these? And it started the discussion on the specificity of the Y strap and how it can, as you mentioned, can be misused if not used in the right hand, because it can have very many negative implications down the line and instantaneously if used wrong.
Absolutely.
Something in our discussion above, we've touched on various critical points regarding the chiropractic profession. Yet, and as you rightfully mentioned earlier, within an era filled with various medical disciplines, technological advancements, and ergogenic aids, in your expert opinion, why are sport chiropractors essential to the exponential development and performance of world-class athletes? What makes the profession, I don't want to say stand out, but it's got its own important facets in the industry that is vital to that of performance?
So there's a couple of things, and maybe I should split this into two. And one is sort of the traditional politics behind it, and the other is actually what chiropractic can bring to the party that's unique and specialized and special to chiropractic, I guess. The first part often creates a bit of juice, but let's keep that brief and to the point. Traditionally, those roles within sports teams and at sports events were fulfilled by physiotherapists. And by and large, I mean, they're working hard to hold their patch. They don't want to give up the position that they've held for a long time, by a lot of the time by virtue of association. A lot of the physiotherapy schools and colleges study alongside medicine. Medicine traditionally becomes the gatekeeper for a sports team, and they know that they're not, general practitioners, sports physicians, are not particularly good with manual therapy. So who do we know who can do that? Is physiotherapists. So in comes the physio, and that traditionally was always the historical model. Time and time again, when we try and get chiropractic into these traveling teams and into positions on those medical teams for sports teams or for multi-sport events, one of the biggest issues that keeps hitting us in the face is, well, what can you offer that the physios don't? And in a lot of ways, that's the crux of the matter. And we're not getting that message across clearly. Sure, we can do all the things that the physios do. Are we as good as them at those techniques or not? That'll always be open to debate. The reality is, a manual therapist, you've got some exposure and experience of doing things like taping and massage and needling and you name it. We can all do that. Some of us are a lot better at it than others, but if you're working in sport, you've got that covered. Where our little niche market comes in and needs to be made clear is what we offer as part of that adjustment, that spinal manipulation or that joint manipulation, to be more exact. There is no doubt that the manipulation offered by chiropractic, which very proudly from our perspective is very specific, short amplitude, high velocity manipulation of a joint, has the greatest impact on your nervous system. And that's what resets the message to that joint, to the muscle, to the tendon, to that whole area in the tissue. And that's what gives you the greatest response. And in all honesty, there's not a thing on this planet that can engage and interact with your body that is more powerful than an appropriately administered adjustment at the right time, the right place, in the right direction. There's not a drug, there's not a surgical intervention, there is nothing that can influence the human body more profoundly and effectively than that manipulation. Now, wouldn't it make sense if you're going to take, for example, the South African medical team that went to the last Olympics, and I think they took 8 physios and 4 sports physicians. Would it not make sense to take someone like a chiropractor, instead of one of those physios, take 7 physios, put one chiropractor in there, regardless of whether they're as good as the physios at massage and stretching and taping and that or not, as long as they can do it, you've now brought a new adjunct which could potentially profoundly affect the performance of those athletes. And that's the message we're not getting across. We're not there to replace the physiotherapist. We're there to bring in an adjunct and a specialization that is likely to have a profound effect on the performance of your athletes. Whether that is injury prevention or actual performance enhancement, that's where we need to be working as sports chiropractors. And that is where we have the biggest impact, time and time again. Our intervention is instantaneous. You can get a patient, an athlete that comes in literally just before their race, says, I'm a bit tight here, this doesn't seem to be working. You could do a couple of tests and go, geez, hold on a second, your hamstring's not firing properly. One adjustment, they get up and they go, geez, okay, that feels a bit better, and they go and break the world record. I mean, that is profound. And there's not another intervention out there that can give you consistently that response. I'm not saying every athlete's going to have the same scenario, but that's the level you're dealing with. And that's why people who have experienced this and have been smart enough to employ this have even had chiropractors as their chief medical officers. There's a number of US track and field teams. There's a number of US Olympic teams. They've actually medical teams, sorry, not athlete teams, medical teams traveling with athletes that have been run by sports chiropractors. And you see it. Those countries across the globe who are more progressive and have the insight into this, quite happy to travel with sports chiropractors in their teams. And unfortunately, it's if you're not traveling with sports chiro, it's to the detriment of your athletes. And as Fix, that's what Fix is working hard to try and correct. Our sort of motive and reason to be is that we want to make that field of access to sports chiropractic equitable across all playing fields. So when you go to the Olympics, whether your country can afford a sports chiropractor or not is irrelevant, because fixed chiropractors will be there to look after your athletes and give them sports chiropractic.
I think from having personal experience and being treated from chiropractors, I can attest to the benefits that I've felt within my own performance, within my own endeavors within swimming. And it's sad to think, and as you mentioned, within the South African medical team that was a part of the Olympics, I'm assuming you're referring to 2021, that there's no space or they can't accommodate for a chiropractor to be a part of that team, because that adds such a different perspective and assets to the team in its entirety. Because as you mentioned earlier, and as I said, each member forms a part of a puzzle that is critical in trying to ensure that athletes can perform optimally. And if you're able to have that variety of medical professions working cohesively towards one goal, towards ensuring the sanctity of the athletes and what is best for them at the end of the day, and for all those athletes in the village, as you mentioned, for those that may not be fortunate enough to be exposed to previous chiropractic care, that they then at least have the opportunity to receive treatment. And something that I think it's fairly cool, at my old high school, Western Boys High, there is a chiropractor who actually has his practice on the field. And I'm not entirely too sure on what his relation is to the school, but from my understanding, he works with all the athletes within the vicinity, specifically with the rugby team. And as you've touched on now, it's so cool that in the same block, you can have a bio, you can have a physio, and you can have a chiropractor treating all of the athletes at the end of the day to ensure that, okay, how are we going to get them from point A to point B? So during the preparation phase of training, when it comes to the game, everything's going to be in line and they're going to be doing the best that they can do. And I did a little bit of research, and according to the Fairway Chiropractic Center, some of the chiropractic care benefits stated on their website include the ability to help increase flexibility and range of motion, the ability to assist with athletic injuries, and the ability to aid in recovery without the usage of prescription drugs, the ability to improve coordination, and the ability to improve athletic performance, which is what we have been discussing now. And from my own experience and from the fair bit of literature I try to read to gain a better understanding, it's, there are diverse caterings or diverse things that the chiropractic profession can play. And as you mentioned, it's not just for athletes. It can be for, looking at pediatrics with younger children or going up into elderly, and how can you ensure that individuals' health is looked after.
Absolutely.
And
another misconception is probably worth touching on as you bring up all that sort of stuff is that, we can treat a baby from a couple of hours old to a patient who's 100 and whatever, and people open their eyes and go, how does that work? Look, the techniques that are employed to treat people within that spectrum are very different. And I think there are a lot of chiropractors out there that specialize in a particular perspective of the whole spectrum of healthcare that's open to chiropractic. There's those who can cover the whole spectrum, but the techniques that you use to treat a 1-year-old versus an elite Olympic 100-meter runner versus a 99-year-old who literally is just looking to be able to get out of bed and be a little bit more functional are vast. The premise of what we're all trying to achieve through what we do is exactly the same. How we achieve it, how we get there, is vastly different.
Yeah.
At the bottom of it is the chiropractic adjustment, and the essence of what that is and what it's trying to achieve is the crux of the matter. What it looks like, how it's presented, may be very different across that spectrum, but the essence of what it is and what we're trying to achieve as chiropractors is consistent across the board.
Yeah. Something that whilst you're talking, came to my mind is, for instance, you mentioned countries that haven't had previous exposure to chiropractic care. So, for instance, as an athlete, how does one discern whether they need to see a sports chiropractor? And what does one do if there are no chiropractic facilities within the area?
Geez, you're putting me under the hammer here, man. And you're asking me not to be that biased, but I can only be biased on this. And that every athlete should try and find a sports chiropractor. Look, what was actually quite fascinating, we worked at the World Games in Kaohsiung in Taiwan in 2009. Fix of actually, I don't know how we burgled it, but we managed to get a contract with the International World Games Association to supply sports chiropractors at all the World Games. And we've been doing that since 2005. What that means is wherever the World Games goes, wherever it is in the world, if they take on the World Games, we come along as part of the package. So why that's fascinating is when we were working in Kaohsiung in Taiwan, chiropractic is illegal in Taiwan. So we were threatened with jail, execution, a few things, which probably would have deterred you from going. But being diehard sports chiropractors, apparently that wasn't enough to deter us from going there. But what we do once we're there, anybody who has accreditation at the games is welcome to make use of our services. So obviously the athletes, the officials, but also all the volunteers who have accreditation are more than welcome to make use of chiropractic care. When we were in Kaohsiung, I reckon, I don't know, I can't remember the exact figures, but upwards of 40 to 45% of the treatments that we did were on local volunteers. And they were all skeptical and all a little bit nervous to come initially. But the minute they'd had a treatment, the queues outside our treatment rooms were ridiculous. And it just goes to show, once you've experienced chiropractic, and it sort of brings me back to a mentor of mine who always used to say, trying to explain to someone what chiropractic is like is trying to explain what a banana tastes like. It's a banana. So until you've actually experienced a chiropractic adjustment and what it does for you and the difference that you feel and how your body acts and reacts afterwards and your function, you won't understand chiropractic. So our biggest thing is getting chiropractic out there. And I think that's where sports chiropractic is an amazing vehicle for this profession. Working at sports events, taking chiropractic to populations and communities that would never have experienced chiropractic or been exposed to chiropractic. And, that just helps grow and develop the profession across the globe. A lovely story as a spin-off from one of the World Games was in 2005 in Duisburg in Germany. We were working alongside the medics, hand in hand at most of the venues. And one of their orthopedic doctors was absolutely fascinated by what we were doing and spent the majority of the 2 weeks literally shadowing us and our treatments. I'm not sure she did much of what she was supposedly employed to do, but she just lapped up what we were doing from a chiropractic perspective. So much so that shortly after the game, she got in touch with the relevant authorities and ended up studying chiropractic in the UK. So now she's a qualified orthopedic surgeon and a qualified chiropractor.
That's really, really cool and diverse. I can imagine if there's a skill, it's a very two diverse fields to then amalgamate together. It's crazy because earlier we were touching on obviously the controversy behind media within the profession and how do you break down the wall of misconceptions. And it's so cool to see that within the sports chiropractic profession, you have the ability to go abroad and be on show for the public. And as you said, a banana is a banana. And the only way you're actually going to know what the benefits are for the chiropractic profession or what a chiropractic is if you go and see a chiropractor. But obviously trying to acquire just that little bit of knowledge prior to seeing one, just to know, okay, this is why I'm going. This is the benefit of seeing a chiropractor. And maybe to segue, and it's slightly off topic, and to just take a step back and to view the medical industry as a whole. But I thought this was a highly interesting fact. And according to the business research company, the sporting industry currently has a net worth of $512 billion as of 2023, and it is projected to reach $623.63 billion in 2027, which shows a forecasted CAGR, which is compound annual rate of 5%. So just a lot of numbers. And why is this significant? Because according to an article published by Grandview Research, by 2027, the sport medical industry is only projected to reach $15.2 billion. And if you're looking at the CAGR, which is a compound annual growth rate of, it's only 8.2%. And that is, again, take another step back. This forms only 2.5% of the entire sports industry's net worth, which includes 3 different pools of resources, specifically by type, revenue, and ownership. And again, when you try to put this into perspective, the numbers are crazy. And Grandview Research states that the demand for sports medicine is on the rise due to the growing incidence of sports injuries and the increasing participation of people in the sports and fitness-related activities. Furthermore, there's beginning to be a shift from proactive to preventative care for sports injuries, which is expected to drive the sports market over the projected period. This leads me to my question as to what is the essential role that the sports chiropractic profession plays within that sport medical industry, and more so, is the profession relevant within an African context due to the prevalent needs of today's society?
So, I mean, starting with that, look, Africa is a very untapped, very, very untapped market. Very, very naive, very young. The opportunity to get in there is huge. The obstacles are, again, largely political, but also naivety, lack of resources, lack of technology, facilities, all of those kind of things. But I mean, Africa is a huge untapped resource. And certainly going forward, if we could get a program together to sort of filter in through Africa, it's, as I say, the opportunities are huge, massive. I think you probably hit the nail on the head in as much as where chiropractic really, I think, has a major role to play in the future going forward with sports medicine is their ability to identify potential issues before there's an injury. And with this sort of shift towards proactive approach to healthcare in general, but sports-specific training and performance, we've got tools and ways of examining the nervous system that would help us predict the potential of an injury that's coming and avert it. And I think that's the crux. You know, if you start looking at the numbers, sadly, in a lot of ways, the sports industry is all about bigger, better, brighter, crowd wowing performances. You obviously want your best players on the pitch all the time. Where they're not on the field, you're losing a lot of money. So it's in everyone's interests, in theory, to make sure that your best players are always on the pitch. Now, that makes a lot of sense, theoretically. What happens in practice is far from that. I guess Premier football is a classic example. At the end of the day, it's horses. It's horse racing. If you're fit, you play. If you're not fit and you can't get fit, you're probably going to get taken out of the back paddock, and if you're lucky, you might not make the end of the day. But it literally is that brutal. So it becomes the player's responsibility to make sure that they're fit and on top of things. And this is where I think chiropractic's going to have to, and we have been leveraging for ages, is off the back of the athletes. We need the athletes to go to the administrators and the organizers of sport and say, we want chiropractors there. They make the difference for us. Because the athlete can feel the difference. They know the difference, and it affects their performance. The administrators don't. The administrators see that as another cost. I can remember going to Manchester United as a field trip as part of the sports medicine course I did. Super excited. This was going to be the best thing ever. We're going to learn so much. I've never been more disappointed in my life. We rocked up there. The head of sports medicine for Manchester United was literally the GP from around the corner. He happened to be good mates with the gaffer from Manchester United and got the role. They had a nutritionist and a massage therapist who doubled up as a bit of a trainer. That literally was their sports medicine team. And we're talking early 2000s. I mean, Manchester United was a powerhouse. And that was the extent of their sports medicine.
Yeah.
The bucket and sponge was still very much a big thing. Like yes, we believe in sports medicine to a point, but we also believe in the bucket and the sponge. If you can run on there with a hairdryer and a bucket and a sponge, the guy's perfect. Why would we need anything more expensive than that? And that's the reality. 80% of those budgets for those Premier League football sides are spent on their top 11 players. The rest of the money is split amongst their reserve teams, their junior teams, their admin staff, their ground staff, the CEO. They're not interested. So as much as we like to think we've got a very important role to play in the future of sport performance, and in reality we probably do, unless it comes from the athletes and is driven by the athletes, we will continue to play the role that we're playing in the background, which is fine. But I don't think we're ever going to hit our potential and really make the difference that we should be making. We've just got to treat more and more athletes, get more and more athletes aware of what we do and the impact that we have, so that they go back to their administrators and say, hold on a second, you want me to perform, you want me to bear fruits of the national program that you put me through, and yet you're not giving me the facilities when I get to the World Cup or the Olympics to perform at my best. Why isn't there a sports chiropractor? And we're getting closer. We are getting closer, but it's relentless. We've got to keep pushing.
I think that is insane when you think back. You mentioned it was the early 2000s when you attended Manchester, and to think, obviously, that's when Man U and Old Trafford were probably seeing the best of their days, performing at some of the highest levels that they have performed in the most recent years. And it's crazy to see, obviously, from then how it has evolved as to where it is today in terms of the medical profession. And even if you're looking at it from a sports science perspective and understanding the different analytical things that happen behind the scenes, whether it be the video analysis looking at the performance or the biokinetics on the S&Cs for training off the field, and then looking back at the medical for the physiological, and then looking at the psychological that takes place with the either the psychiatrist or psychologist on the field, off the field, to ensure that everything's put together, which is crazy. And it's also sad that you mentioned that obviously through all the revenue that they're making and how it's split up. At the end of the day, if you're thinking of sports culture today, sports clubs are run as a business, and it's how is it going to make more money to be self-sufficient, number one, and how is it going to generate revenue to continue to be a broadcasting brand, something that's going to draw in the attention of the public.
So I mean, it's quite interesting because there's been quite a shift in world sport, certainly through COVID. Literally, world sport died for 2 years through COVID. Nothing was happening. Obviously, the biggest sports like football and that managed to circumvent how they managed to keep games alive. But by and large, the world of sport died for 2 years. there was absolutely nothing. So as they're starting to pick up now, reorganizing budgets, sponsorships, the shifts in which sports have become popular has made a big difference and a big impact, I think, on what's going to happen in the world of sport in the next 3 to 5 years, maybe longer. I mean, one of the fascinating things is what's happened with paddle. I mean, pre-COVID, nobody knew what the hell paddle was. Now, jeepers, every Tom, Dick, and Harry's playing paddle. And fascinatingly, its biggest impact is on the world of tennis, which, I mean, might seem quite logical to most people who are listening to this, but on a sports politics level, you know, tennis holds its position at the Olympics and where it is in world sport based on the number of people who play the game, its reach across the world, its marketability, its viewership, its sponsorships. You know, there's a very intricate equation that goes into deciding which of the world's biggest sports and who gets the biggest seeding money from the International Olympic Committee. Now, if tennis is losing market share to paddle and that it starts denting the bottom line of that equation, it won't be long before tennis is no longer top of the pops within the Olympic circles, which is going to completely change the dynamic of world sport, who watches what, where the money goes on the sponsorship deals. I think the playing field of world sport has shifted drastically. It's going to take a little while for that to filter to the public. But certainly on a political level, there have been some massive shifts in the last 2 years. And that's going to dictate where the money goes, and the money pays for the show. And sport is an entertainment industry, eh?
That is crazy. And I wanted to touch on that. And it's, you mentioned during the COVID era, it was trying to identify ways in which the sports industry would shift. But essentially, it was how would it pivot in order to stay afloat, to keep the industry whole. And specifically, when you look at the US and the various different sporting teams that they have that are associated to the different leagues, and how could these teams continue playing if they aren't, or they don't have any ticket sales? How are they going to ensure that all the directors and from, if you're looking bottom up, all those that are important to that organization, how are they going to be paid? And in the end of the day, what they had to revert to was entertainment. It became a way for individuals who are isolating at home to at least feel free and to look out and to be like, wow, okay, there is still things ongoing within the world. There is still, you know, people running around being active, and whether it was on the grand stage or, you know, basketball at the back of the house, it was just a way to alleviate that pressure. And again, going back to that point of entertainment. And through this discussion, we've touched on various points, you know, looking at the intersection of sports medicine and chiropractic care and how that's all relevant within the sporting industry. And we've touched on financial things and also trying to understand management within the global perspective. But maybe to wrap this up and to try and further understand Simon Lawson and, you know, your place in the industry and, you know, where your heart and passion is. If I were to ask you, then if you're only allowed to give a one-worded answer, and it's the first thing that's going to pop into your mind, what is the thing that drives you and motivates you, that makes you passionate about your industry and the things that you are involved in within the chiropractic profession? What is your why?
You want a one-word answer? I would probably encapsulate it as performance would probably be the word, and what that entails on whatever level. You know, whether you're a day-to-day patient with back pain or whether you're an elite athlete, you have your own idea of what your performance would be. And if that means you're getting out of a chair without having to couple it with a voice or a sound, or you can do it easily without your knees cracking, or you're running the 109.4 seconds, you will have a certain level of performance in your view. And for me, that's the passion, that's the drive, is to make sure that every patient that I engage with, whether you're an athlete or a 99-year-old or even a 1 week old, when I've finished doing what I need to do, like, you've noticed a difference, like I made a difference in your life, and I can see the difference, you can feel the difference, and you can see it in the person's face. That for me gets me out of bed in the morning. I don't see what I do as a job, I must admit. I love what I do. been incredibly fortunate, and within that fortune have been even more fortunate that I'm passionate about what I do. And I think I'm one of the lucky guys out there who can say that. I don't think there's a lot of people out there who can say that they truly passionate about what they do every day and that they don't see it as a job having to get out of bed every morning.
It's so exciting and it's refreshing to hear, as you say, when you are deeply in love or passionate about what you do, it no longer feels like you are working, essentially. It is work. There are parts to it that may be tedious, but it's that thing that, you know, at the end of the day, you want to be there. Through engaging with clients or patients and the community as a whole, whether it be locally or nationally or internationally, you have the opportunity to bring about change. And it's for those that are around you that you're able to create an impact within their life, and that may bring about significant change in their performance, either if it's just general health or on and off the sports field. To conclude, is there any advice that you can give to the listeners who may be interested in pursuing a career within the field of chiropractic or sports medicine, or perhaps in any personal facet that is integral to the sporting industry?
Like specifically with sport, I do think you need to have a passion. Got that passion, then engaging with the different facets in the sport, you'll soon find out something that floats your boat, or piques your interest. More specifically from a chiropractic and a sports chiropractic perspective, I mean, if you're remotely interested in making a difference to people's lives, you've got a caring nature, you love helping people, it really is a profession that's worth considering. You work pretty much with your hands, and in fact, almost entirely with your hands. And your skills that you learn through college and that equip you to be able to have that kind of an impact on someone's life. You know, compared to a few other manual therapies and that, as a chiropractor, you do get a lot of autonomy. You're educated as a primary contact health practitioner, which means anybody can walk into your rooms off the street and you should be able to diagnose them and find out what's wrong with them. If you can treat them as a chiropractor, that's fantastic. If you can't, you know who to refer them to. And our profession is very unique in that regard. So I think anybody generally who's interested in healthcare and the well-being of people and wanting to make a difference to people's lives, chiropractic is a fantastic profession. It really is an amazing profession and very, very rewarding. I can always remember giving lectures to students years back and saying, you know, the beauty of chiropractic is that you are the master of your destiny. Within chiropractic, you can work in your own little practice. You can work in a multidiscipline practice. You can work with multiple practitioners. You could work on a ship. You could work in a corporate environment. You could work for a sports team. You know, you can almost choose the environment that you want to make your own and make a difference to people's lives in.
Something that has always stuck with me, it's a quote that I heard that says, people for people. And definitely something that I can take away from this conversation is that within this profession, it's, as you mentioned, it's hands-on, and you're engaging with various individuals. And as we discussed earlier, although different in practice, you know, it can be through younger children to athletes to the elderly. And how are you making an impact on those that are around you, and essentially bringing about good for those people within a medical sense to ensure longevity within both their health and well-being. But maybe to wrap off, I think definitely a highlight quote: a banana is a banana. And as you said, the only way we'll know what a chiropractor is if you see a chiropractor, because a chiropractor is a chiropractor. So thank you so much, Simon Lawson, for joining me on this show. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for availing yourself to sit through this very long discussion. I highly appreciate it. It's definitely been very engaging and insightful to have this opportunity with you.
Wonderful. Michael, thank you so much for the opportunity. It really has been the honor and the privilege has been mine. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you, and good luck with your show. I think you've got a novel concept there, and I'm sure your listeners love the conversations that you bring to them. Get the insight going and some thought processes taking over. Well done.
Thank you very much. And for those that are still listening, all the way to the end of the episode. I always say it. I value and appreciate your time. I know the tendency to drop off is quite high. So I do value and appreciate that you listen all the way to the end. And as always, I promise that there are many more insightful and engaging episodes that are to come. But for now, that is it. I am your host, Michael Bromfield. This is Ballers Brew signing